Welcome to the Town Hall number 11. We have a really special show today. We're going beyond with the NFT conversation, getting into the metaverse and bringing in self-sovereign identity. So identity is important when we're all over the place digitally. And so I think we've got two really special speakers. So what I'd like to do is introduce you to the host, Kent Langley. He's our COO of OpenExO Inc. and the mastermind behind the blockchain, the cryptoverse, and the ExO economy.
Nikki, that's always too much, but thank you. And I am super excited for today's show. So I hope that in this first couple of minutes, while I sort of stall for a little bit and talk about NFTs, and then I'm going to introduce our two panelists for today, which I'm super, super excited about. We've got Adam B. Levine and we've got Kaliya Hamlin on today. And we're going to be talking about digital identity. We're going to be talking about non-fungible tokens, in particular NFTs. And I think personally, the title of our thing was a fad, ? And for me, there's no way this is a fad. So I'm super biased, but we're going to address that question as we go along. And we're going to talk about use cases for NFTs. And I hope use cases that even go well beyond some of what we've seen applied in the art space and the game space. So there's Kaliya, and I've known Kaliya too long. It's Kaliya Young. So sorry for that. Thank you, Kaliya, for the correction. And so Adam and Kaliya will join us just in a minute. I just want to say a quick little bit to remind everybody. So these town halls come to you from something called the ExO Economy. The ExO Economy is the economic activities using our native cryptocurrency EXOs on our own proprietary blockchain technology. And we've been running our own blockchain since April of 2018. It's almost become something that just happens in the background. Sometimes people forget even that we're doing all of that. And that currency has now spread globally. There are many, many people staking the currency daily, and it is still a private currency, which shocks some people, but we've done this this way over time. And we're in an exciting moment for the ExO economy where things are growing and changing because the OpenExO community, which is whose capabilities that currency represents, its utility, if you will, is growing dramatically. We've just hit just about 17,000 community members in the OpenExO community. A lot of that is due to the combination of something called EXO Builder with OpenExO. EXO Builder having been for a long time a project of a number of our community members run by Pedro. And so when we brought all that together, it's caused a huge influx of exciting activities and builder cohorts and workshops and new people coming into the community and tons of new opportunities for the utilization of the EXOS token throughout the EXO Builder ecosystem and the OpenExO ecosystem and all of the transformation programs we run. So with that in mind, I just think this is one of the most exciting times we've seen to date since this journey started a number of years ago with the writing of the book in 2014, the creation of EXO Works in 2015, and then a little bit later, the creation of OpenExO, the platform, the community, and everything that's come to be. So there's just so much to be sort of grateful for as we come into this last part of 2021, even though it's been a weird year and it might keep being weird for a little bit longer. It's super exciting. And I think we've got nothing but up and positive things coming our way as a community. So I hope you're out there and you're listening. And I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our two speakers. And, Nikki, I know I had a little bit longer for the first segment, but I'd rather just get the party started. So our first speaker that I'll introduce today is Adam B. Levine. Adam has been exploring, chronicling, and inspiring the world of Bitcoin and non-currency tokens since 2011. And there he is. Hi, Adam. Okay. Adam is a serial entrepreneur, managing editor of podcasts at CoinDesk, CEO at Tokenly, which I know he'll tell us a little bit about in a minute. And he's also the creator of a long-running, a long-running Bitcoin podcast, It's called Speaking of Bitcoin, and it was formerly called Let's Talk Bitcoin. So Adam, welcome to the show. And if I missed anything super critical there that we need to know about you, why don't you fill us in and tell us what moves you, what brings you here to this world of NFTs.
Sure. So I came to cryptocurrency because I am like an early technologist, typically a journalist in spaces where journalists sort of dare not tread in the very early days of things. I've been doing podcasts as sort of my native format and building podcast networks since 2005. And basically, I'm here because technology in an abstract sense is nice, but technology in practice in ways that actually empower people to have more better choices in their lives is empowering in ways that are hard to match in really any other area. And so my firm belief for a long time has been that given better choices, people make better choices. And I see technology as the way to do that. And I see Bitcoin and blockchains and tokens and sort of these new types of ownership systems as fundamentally game-changing technologies that offer that in ways that, again, are hard to match really anywhere else. And that's why I've been here, and that's why I continue to be here, even after a long time.
Speaks to me because I've got a massive transformative purpose, which is a phrase from the EXO world, to empower people with technology. It's something I've been doing since I was a little kid, and I can't really stop. So I really appreciate that and what you're doing there. And I will come back in a little bit to this concept of fundamentally game-changing tech. In particular, we'll probably talk a little bit about NFTs today. Before I do that, I want to bring Kaliya over. So Kaliya Young is widely known as Identity Woman and an independent advocate for the rights and dignity of our digital selves. In 2005, she co-founded the Internet Identity Workshop, and in 2021, she co-founded the Thoughtful Biometrics Workshop. Kaliya works to build a multi-stakeholder collaborations to solve hard techno-social challenges in community. She's the author of 2 books, Domains of Identity, and a comprehensive guide to self-sovereign identity. Those were 2020 and 2018 respectively, so go check out Kaliya's books. Along with lots of articles, she has received a Master's of Science in Identity Management and Security from the University of Texas at Austin, and is an instructor in computer information systems at Merritt College in Oakland. And I've known Kaliya for several years now. Kaliya, you were one of the original influencers on how we set up the ExO economy as a complementary currency from a meal at a diner, I think in Miami at some point in the past. And we've been talking ever since, and our topics have ranged all the way from identity and tokens and blockchains to permaculture and the environment and carbon sequestration. So I've always enjoyed that. And welcome to the show, Kaliya. It's really lovely to have you today.
Thanks so much, Ken. It's great to be here with you.
So did I miss anything you'd like to tell kind of this audience as we get started, what it is that moves you these days and what you're thinking about identity and any of the related things around cryptocurrencies?
Sure. I mean, yeah, my center of gravity, as my bio stated, has been around these questions around digital identity and digital representation of ourselves. And I've facilitated a community on a quest to solve this problem. It's actually technically fairly challenging to have people be the center of their own digital representations and not be sort of at the affect of other identity or identifier systems that are placed on us. And how do we get our own center? And I love the term from the community, the massive transformative purpose. I've been on this mission to really support the emergence of a new layer of the internet for identity for people, bonus things, and organizations come with that in ways that can be empowering. I don't think these systems by default are empowering unless we really push to make them that way, and unless we push the underlying architectures to allow for that. But then that's not enough. We also have to figure out how the business processes and the resulting end user experience and flow of information still is empowering 10 years later, right? It's not just the tech alone isn't enough. We also have to shape the cultural norms and the legal norms and the business processes and systems that come with these new tools that radically shake up how things happen today.
Okay. So I think we're going to have lots of fun things to talk about today. I've got a few little notes here. I'm going to bring on Salim in just a moment. He has magically appeared backstage. So give me just a second on that, team. And I want to remind everybody that from a format perspective, Adam, I'll be giving you about 5 minutes completely of your own to talk about whatever you want to tell us that's hot and amazing and something that I hope really thought-provoking for us. And Kaliya, you'll get the same as well. We'll be giving you about 5 minutes just afterwards. We'll probably talk a little bit in between, and then we'll move to more of a panel format where all of us we'll discuss the things that we've talked about today. And if we have questions, which I really hope we do from the audience out there, we'll try to address those as well. Sound good? Okay, awesome. So also backstage, we have Salim Ismail. Salim Ismail is the co-founder and chairman at OpenEXO. He is the co-founding, hopefully I get this right, co-founding executive director of Singularity University. He has been a serial and or parallel entrepreneur for probably most of his life, like a lot of us that are attracted to this community. And we are really happy to have Salim here today. And Salim has been doing a deep dive into the world of NFTs and may or may not share what he has seen and learned along the way as we go as my co-host on this panel. So Salim, welcome.
Great to be here.
Good to see you today. And as you can see, we have Adam and Kaliya, and I'm about to turn the microphone over to Adam to give us a few minutes on what he sees out there in the world and what he'd like to tell us. So Adam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kent. So I guess what's worth talking about in the context of kind of today's conversation is the intersection of NFTs and identity, which is something that I think we're seeing increasingly. Before I talk about that, let me talk about NFTs a little bit specifically. People right now are looking at sort of a second wave of NFTs. That's the first, call it early majority type wave, and we're not even really into early majority yet. The concept, if you break it down into the fundamental words, it's very simple. It's non-fungible tokens. It's a way to represent something on the internet in terms of who owns a thing that isn't cleanly exchangeable really for anything else that's out there, right? That represents something unique. And so if you think about it, the ability to track and transfer in a decentralized and robust way ownership of arbitrary stuff on the internet is an incredibly, incredibly powerful change in kind of human history, and something that was very much missing from the internet, which has led to it being developed in ways that have been very empowering in some ways. But to Kaliya's comments, that are not necessarily empowering over long periods of time and are not necessarily empowering at all. The technology has the capability to be empowering, but it needs to be used in ways that do that. So the reason why NFTs have been something that have been interesting to me from long before we called them NFTs is because when you add a neutral ownership layer to the internet, you get the ability to start to treat internet interactions, internet business relationships, pretty much everything in a way that's much more analogous to sort of the real world and much less like the internet that we've sort of come to know, where the lack of ability to track who owns really what stuff on the internet leads to things like systems like a transfer of a domain name, which is basically, if you wanted to take that into real world terms, it's like, I have a domain name in my hand, you have money in your hand. I throw my domain name up into the air, you throw your money at me, and we both hope that we catch each other's, transfers at the same point. But if that doesn't happen, then there's lots of things that can go wrong. And so this leads to increased costs. This leads to third parties necessarily needing to be involved to conduct escrow and transactions. And it leads to relationships that are not direct relationships, where rather than reseller relationships as we have in the real world, we have affiliate relationships online, which means that as an affiliate, as opposed to a reseller, you are effectively a marketing arm of someone else's company, as opposed to potentially having your own company and having your own relationships, which is much more kind of like the real world context. So at a base technology layer, NFTs are an incredibly important innovation. Blockchains generally, but NFTs in terms of generalizing the singular ownership of like classes of things, but individual objects. That's kind of where I see the most important elements of this. Now, this is something that today is being applied primarily in the arts and the game space, and of course, amid a speculative mania that is driving up the price of anything. And to the extent that something isn't real, to the extent that it isn't tied to reality, is to the extent that it becomes easier for it to be speculated on in a way that is untethered from reality. So they've been performing pretty well, and cryptocurrency and different types of assets in general have been because of that sort of dynamic. It's not really about the technology, it's about the environment in which it's operating and kind of the differences that it presents to that. So the change I think we've seen specifically over, call it the last 6 months or perhaps 9 months at this point, is a move away from this point in the history of NFTs where people think about them as something that's pretty and towards something that's useful. And one of the primary areas, not intentionally, but inadvertently, that they've stumbled upon is actually the area of identity, where non-fungible tokens represent effectively the modern equivalent of a country club membership or a social club membership or something along those lines. And so being able to connect those dots to where you have something that is limited in quantity, that is unique to yourself, and that acts as an identifier for you in a variety of social contexts is something that is, to my knowledge, quite new and quite powerful in terms of the potential that it sort of lays out for all of these different areas. And it acts to a lesser extent as an enabling and organizing layer for organizations that typically would be reliant on centralized third parties because there simply wasn't any other way to do it, can now become distributed communities where you have ecosystems rather than individual, platforms, and where ownership is a concept that goes beyond the company that has created the platform towards the people who make the platform valuable. I started my earliest experiments with these types of things. We did not do NFTs, we did rewards tokens in 2014 when I launched the first tokenized reward system, which was called LTB Coin at the time. That was, again, a very, very early experiment, and it's just amazing to see how far this stuff has come in the last 7 or 8 years, and even then to see how still early we are in this process. So I won't take up any more time, but that's kind of where I'm thinking about in terms of the intersection here is identity and NFTs are actually an incredibly powerful innovation that I think we're going to see over the next year to 18 months become an incredibly dominant concept within the space and probably quickly become overplayed, but still empowering.
Adam, that's fantastic. And just to sort of rattle off a couple of key things there, you mentioned domain names, right? So we've got the rise of ENS and unstoppable domains and other things like that, where the domains are actually NFTs.
Yes.
And this is very little known in my experience. People just do not know this is happening. And if you want a .DAO domain, you're going to go through unstoppable domains and you're going to buy an NFT for it. And they're taking a completely different approach, by the way, for how you secure your domain, being brand respectful. And I thought that was amazing when I saw that. So that's part of what you mentioned. I love the comment that you made. It's not about the technology, it's about the environment. I hope we get a chance to come back to that. I'll make a note because I'd love to talk about how the environment has changed, what the context is, what contexts have shifted. NFTs of membership tokens, and particularly empowering for forms of organizations. In particular, you didn't mention it, but decentralized autonomous organizations is a no-brainer. I've been saying that if you sell NFTs in a collection on, say, OpenSea or anywhere, you just created a DAO, whether you realize it or not. And that's a funny thing that people haven't, I don't know about you, but I haven't quite seen it always click beyond the sale, right? To the fact that you just made a community and that community has actual power because of what they own. And then I didn't know that you launched that project in 2014. So that's awesome. That's new news. I'd love to hear some more about that sometime. So let's shift over and let's intersect with Kaliya's work. So let's bring Kaliya back. Remember, everybody, Kaliya Identity Woman is here, and Kaliya is an expert in and deeply experienced in digital identity. So Kaliya, you've heard Adam. We'd love to hear a few minutes from you. Say take up to 5 minutes and tell us what you're seeing on the edge of digital identity, maybe how it intersects with NFTs, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I want to share 3 underlying or emerging protocols that, like NFTs, we'll see whether they burst out and people talk about them. But I'm hoping what the level of where this audience is at, they're appropriate. So the first is a open standard that's experienced a small hiccup in the standardization process at the W3C, which could be a good sign because the folks who opposed it are the incumbents. But the standard is called Decentralized Identifier. And what makes it slightly different than the crypto addressing universe, at least as I understand it right now, is that with cryptocurrencies and with NFTs, your identifier, your anchor for all of your activity is your public key or a hash of your public key. And with decentralized identifiers, there's an abstraction. There's the decentralized identifier itself, an instrument called a decentralized identifier document, and that document contains the current set of public keys associated with that particular DID. And what this abstraction does is allow persistent anchoring for much longer period of time than the lifespan of a public-private key pair. Anchoring everything to a set of public keys that's high value and you need it to persist for a long time isn't really a great idea. And I think, there's going to be kind of an awakening about the opportunity and the technical innovation that decentralized identifiers provide. Another tool that we've invented is called a verifiable credential. And this is an open standard that lets any entity say anything it wants about another entity. So this is being used to express verifiable credentials for people like in the educational credentialing space. Institutions assert what their students have accomplished with degrees and passing particular courses. You have entities asserting things about organizations. So there's a group called the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation that issues persistent identifiers to businesses. That this has increasingly become a requirement, this number for international trade and cross-border transactions. And then you have the identity of things and tracking things through supply chains. And so the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is running pilot projects, more than that, I think proof of concept projects where all the paperwork associated with things crossing U.S. Customs need to present that or in time. The pilots are already obviously a starting point, present that information using a verifiable credential. And these credentials are, the verifiable part it is true. It is cryptographically signed by a particular party. Solving those large scale interoperability trust problem is a different layer of the puzzle. And there are groups like Trust over IP working on that, the set of challenges. And then the final thing that builds on this kind of like, what could we actually do with it that changes key dynamics is a protocol called Decentralized Identifier Communication, or DIDComm, that supports peer-to-peer encrypted communication. But unlike a lot of the current sort of paradigm around, secure messaging apps where you have one public-private key pair and all of your messaging happens via that one encryption pathway, is that you have separate public-private key pairs for every single connection. So this protocol potentially gives us a path to owning our own social graph. And from there, potentially having portability because it's ours, not the institutions that we happen to be interacting on. So with that, and then I just wanted to build on something that was mentioned by Adam, which is that ENS names are actually decentralized identifiers now. So I'll put a link into the chat. So that's probably the most immediate direct intersection between what he shared and what I just spoke about.
Awesome. Kaliya, thank you. That was a wonderful update on the current state of digital identity protocols and potentially where they might start to intersect a little bit with things like non-fungible tokens. You said something interesting, and I just want to dive in on this one a little bit. You said, and forgive me if I didn't get this exactly right. So I think you said tying your identity to something of you said value, and I think you mean like an NFT that has a potentially a floating or rising value over time might be problematic. Is that?
No, that's not what I said. I
Okay,
said it's okay. It's
No,
all
that's
good.
why I wanted to catch that again.
I
Could you?
specifically was saying, so in many in the way that blockchains exchange information, you're anchoring the information to public-private key pairs. And so the thing that is on the blockchain that's your identifier for your wallet is a public key. Right? And so that means that it's locked to that public key, and you have to maintain control of your private keys forever.
Right.
So you may not want your university degree issued to a public key. That may not be long-term stable enough and safe enough. You want it slightly abstracted. So this decentralized identifier creates the ability to rotate the keys associated with the particular identifier. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get the cryptography and you get persistence longer than the lifespan of a public-private key pair.
Okay, thank you for expanding on that. I really wanted to dig into that one just a little more to make sure I understood what you were doing there. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to make a transition. Actually, before we do the panel, because I'm going to shift it up just a little bit. Sorry, team. Let's actually bring Salim out. Kaliya, I'll have you back in just a second for the panel, so don't go anywhere. And Salim, you've heard Adam and you've heard Kaliya. I know you've been taking a pretty deep dive into the world of NFTs in a number of areas. What do you think?
Well, one of the questions I've been asking and getting answered is this a fad or are they here to stay? And it's pretty clear that they're here to stay in a pretty profound way. The thing that I find most exciting about all of this is that in Web 2, the ownership of data and objects was held with the companies. Your Twitter account is owned actually by Twitter. All the content that you provide to Facebook is actually legally owned by Facebook. And so they allow you to download a copy of it or delete it, but actually the technical ownership is there. With Web3, NFTs, etc., the ownership goes back to the individual, which is why you don't see Apple, Google, Facebook getting into it. They're like, what the hell? This is our ownership. We lose ownership here. And I think that's the most exciting part. And I think the implications of this now become really profound because we can now bestow and navigate ownership, and people can really, really own their own data. And as Kaliya talks about, their own identity. I'm fascinated by how this might unroll. I've got 100 questions, which we'll have to navigate who gets to ask what questions.
Well, we'll have anybody can ask anybody a question on the panel. That's totally fine today. And we're going to go ahead and
I've
transition.
got 100. So
you've got 100.
You'll
So
have
I'll moderate you a little bit. Yeah. So one of the assertions that I hear frequently about the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 is it's just a transition from centralization to decentralization. And while that is true, it's certainly what you assert in that it's also the transition of ownership back to the people who are generating or originating, in this case, and often is the case, the data. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. So, and when you tie that, of course, to identity, and then potentially you tie identity to NFTs or other types of public-private key pairs, I just think the number of possibilities this unlocks are astronomical. And it's not that often that we see a shift of this magnitude, especially not this fast. Look how fast this has come on. The blockchain's come on, it's been 13 years or so. But when you look at just NFTs and the public awareness of them, that's like, what, 2 years? I mean, did we know what an NFT was just a couple of years? I mean, some people did, of course, but it was the general public had no idea. And it was art that pushed it forward. So you were just roaming around Art Basel. So as we bring the rest of the panel back on, let's bring Kaliya back and Adam back. What did you see in terms, Salim, as you were roaming all around Art Basel in Miami? I was telling Adam they ran Pixel Mind Basel or Pixel Basel in Decentraland, which I visited, and that was super fun. So I'd love to maybe use that as a transition into the panel, and then we'll start to get into some of the questions. We do have quite a few questions queued up today.
The big thing is, what do I remember about last week? Because it was such a
Sounds
dense
right.
week. I was running into people on the streets and saying hi, etc. So Michael Janssen, one of our guests from last week who works with Adam, was there. So we hung out a bit. I think the buzz was unbelievable. You also have the inevitable chaotic, there was an event called Blockchain in Space, and you're like, oh, okay. And there are all these incredibly bizarre things happening, which indicates the broader trend. But I think let's
Okay.
get to the other questions.
All right. Well, I'm super excited to see IPFS nodes in space personally. But that should be there. So actually not quite be interplanetary yet, but we'll get there. So let's do it. Topic today, reminder for everyone, is are NFTs a fad? So I think we should just start with that. And I'm going to toss this out to you first, Adam. And so the question that came in is, why are NFTs more than a fad? So
Yeah, so I addressed this. Thank you for the question. I addressed this a little bit in kind of my opening, but basically, NFTs are the popularization by any means necessary of a fundamental reinvention of how we own stuff and how we address that ownership on the internet and where it's visible and what you can do with it. So that one, So Kaliya, I think, gave a really great overview, actually, of the kind of non-token focused side of distributed identity. One point that I would make is that if we were talking about using like a Bitcoin address or an Ethereum address as an identifier, then I would agree with you on your point that it's not very durable. But the nice part about NFTs is that they are tokens. And tokens are by their nature transferable, and so they can simply be transferred from one identity to another identity. And it basically is the same thing by different means. But the challenge that I've seen in technology over and over again is that being good doesn't mean you win. Being good just means you have a good solution, but it doesn't mean that anybody uses it. And for a long time in crypto, that was a big problem that we had around these kind of identity solutions. I started my company Tokenly in 2014 to support my own use case with my rewards program, because I realized that although I could do a token that would allow me to do what I wanted, no infrastructure existed to support any of the things that I wanted to do with it. And so I built out a startling and bewildering array of different products that I never thought that I would build in order to just simply be able to accomplish my aims. And for a very long time, all the things that we built, we would talk to people and nobody understood why we were building them, because the idea of non-currency tokens was like bizarre and didn't appear to have any use cases. But it was always about this reinvention of ownership on the internet. And so, Kent, you said that, the last 2 years, NFTs have been becoming a thing sort of to the general public. I would argue that that really started in January of this year. I think that the time frame on it has been incredibly short. If you want to look for precursors in terms of what caused the sort of spark that we've seen this year, I would peg that very firmly to some of the precursor artwork, but very much the sports world. It was NBA Top Shot, and it was the NBA as a major brand coming on and deciding to do one of these projects that really started to certainly attract attention from myself and lots of other people who had been working on these ideas for a long time, but they didn't really have any traction. So to me, the question isn't about what's the best solution, it's about what's the best solution that we can actually get into use. And just the incredible fear of missing out that exists right now in the world of NFTs is a signaling cycle that we've seen before, where effectively you have a technology that is basically far overvalued relative to its current actual utility and worth. But that value then sort of sends up a flare, and then that flare attracts attention from people who really can bring that value and those types of use cases into whatever the particular area that is attracting that attention. And it's not immediate. It's a process that typically takes years, but the signaling events, once it happens, has tended to do that. At least so far, we've seen that with both Bitcoin and Ethereum. And my belief at this point is that NFTs represent the next one of those, and I won't be surprised if it's DAOs after that. So I'll stop at this point, but that gives you an idea.
that's great. I have a handful of questions here about DAOs. I'm going to hold those and separate them a little bit because I think it's a very interesting use case. Let's take. Before I move on to the next, Kaliya, did you want to add anything to that around, why NFTs are, the question again is, why are NFTs more than a fad? anything you want to add there or no?
So I only am convinced they're not a fad because Salim says so.
Well, then he-
Well, I'm actually really interested in the intersection with physical objects and NFTs. So I'm an artist. I've been drawing. If you've ever seen me at a conference, I usually have a sketch pad and I'm drawn away. And I have 30 years of art at this point. And I actually am like, I want to sell it, but I don't want to just sell it normally. I'm looking at Materium as a pathway to like basically tag the physical art and have its life cycle be managed digitally. So that when someone sells the art that they bought from me to someone else, potentially, this is common fractional ownership, I think. Is that what it's called? Or I still own, like, I sell 90% of my art, and then I still own 10%. And then when it sells, I get 10% of the revenue from the next sale.
Typically, that's called a royalty split, is what they typically call it in there. Fractionalized ownership is a thing, but it's slightly different in terms of the application to which it's usually applied.
Okay, so I'm still trying to figure out this world. At least conceptually, I'm sort of going in the right direction. So that's where my interest is, and I think too, like I have a little bit of a kind of nervousness when I hear people talking about like using NFTs for identity use cases. I really hope that that's done wisely and thoughtfully, and that the wrong technology isn't used in use cases that could be used. I mean, so we'll see. I mean, it's going to be an interesting journey to see how all this plays out in the so, as you said, the real world of real adoption for real problems.
Awesome. So a couple of quick notes. You mentioned a Materium, Kaliya. This is we can post this link into the chats. It's Materium, Mattereum.com, and they've created something called the Materium Asset Passport, which is trying to create a legal framework and an arbitration framework to connect real world goods with basically NFTs. And it's really fascinating work. And I've taken a deep dive on that one, and I absolutely love what they're up to there. So, Salim, you said you had about 100 questions. So opportunity number one, to toss one of those out there.
So if I'm a country and I want to issue unique identifiers, aka passports or identity cards to citizens, I'm curious, Adam, what the technical appropriateness of NFTs is for that use. It sounds like a no-brainer at one level for me. But Kaliya, what are the other policy or legal issues that may come up? Because you've been looking at a lot of this stuff around sovereign ID, et cetera, et cetera.
So first, like, don't do it. So I think, you know, what's really key about the verifiable credentials work is that that's the technology I would use, is a verifiable credential. In fact, you have states already using this to do that. So South Korea is going to use it for its driver's license. Looks like the government of Ontario, Canada, is going this direction. The EU just announced its digital wallet program that points in the direction that it'll likely adopt this verifiable credential standard. And it has several large projects like the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework, ESIF, and the European Blockchain, EBSI. I don't even know what, anyways, they're doing great. So what happens is that the government can take the thing that it issues to you today in paper and package up all that information on that paper document, whether it's a passport or a driver's license or whatever, and digitally sign it and hand it to you in a digital wallet you control. This is really different than anchoring it to something persistent on a blockchain. A key, you basically make the individual the pivot point for sharing information about themselves and no one else. So it's really important that we don't actually give persistent, unique identifiers to everyone that they should use for everything. because that creates sort of a panoptic state of affairs where everybody's watching everybody do everything and we have no privacy. That's
Isn't
not
that
the
where we
world
are
we want.
now? I mean, the best
Well-
framing I've seen for the world today is the framing of a global airport, right? In an airport, you know you're being surveilled and your rights can be taken away at any time. And certainly in many countries today, you're living like that on a day-to-day basis. London with the hundreds of cameras that are tracking you, etc. I'm not saying that should be the case, obviously. Let me flip the question a slightly different way. If you had a country, or is there a way of issuing a passport on a self-sovereign ID basis where the state doesn't get to say what's happening, because you get into all sorts of interesting issues of jurisdiction at that point?
What do you mean where the state? I mean, yeah,
Well-
they can issue that information to you in the format of a verifiable credential, and you decide who you share with and how much information from that credential you want to share.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Adam, you want to weigh in on that one? I think.
Yeah, I'd love to. So first off, I actually don't disagree with anything that was said just now. I think that, like what I'm concerned about is how do we popularize these technologies and what use cases are they good for today? The history of technology is not one of, things rolling out to 6 billion people in the first go. It's very much a slow progression of the people who have the most money to spend on it and the most time to waste on it. They're the ones that sort of pay for the initial stages of development, adoption, prove that it's cool, and then it kind of goes from there. So that's very much where I think NFTs are today. There are lots of hard problems still to solve around these things, but they do enable things that are not possible with the current sort of status quo. And that is the ability to have pseudonymous relationships on the internet where you're known by certain identifiers. And effectively, as I said, membership in a social club or in a sort of country club on the internet is, I think, the perfect use case for these things at first. I expect that we're going to see all-inclusive resorts that are built around, instead of having traditional timeshare ownerships, your ownership will be represented by an NFT, and having that will be your pass to do various things. But it's not the sort of thing where I'd say, well, the country of Ghana should adopt, NFTs and have, a social club that has all of their people in it. I think that that's not the stage that we're at right now. But again, the question is, how do you get from here to there? And I think that how do you get from here to there, I really like what I'm seeing in the, and I think that it is important that the things be monetizable too, because like it or not, we live in an age of mania. And that mania drives people towards things that appreciate and value faster than everything else around them. And so to the extent that these draw attention is to the extent that they popularize some of the ideas and technologies behind not just NFTs, but behind these concepts of identity and ownership. And that is, I think, the big sea change that we're still walking towards, although we are certainly not there today.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. And Salim, thanks for that great question. The next question, actually, you sort of already led us there a little bit, Adam. I want to talk a little bit about other use cases for NFTs. And this is kind of what we're talking about, the possibility of, identity for a nation. And we've seen really interesting points of views. But what are some, so again, if you look back to sort of, as you mentioned, the sports use cases, we look back at CryptoPunks as one of the earliest, more successful art projects. What are we seeing now? And I think you can mention things like games, right? So we're looking at Axie Infinity, and there is going to be a Cambrian explosion of games using NFTs. We just saw Warner Brothers release a collection of NFTs, which are effectively avatars for forms of games. So even beyond games, but art, games, business, other, anything that you can think of, what are going to be some really amazing use cases for NFTs over time?
So it was mentioned in one of the earlier questions, this concept of tying NFTs to real world items. I actually think that that's also a use case we're not ready for yet. It's one that people have been excited about for a long time. But to the extent that you try to take a technology that only has awareness of what's happening on a blockchain and attempt to extend that control into the real world is to the extent you're reintroducing third parties and some sort of verifier or some sort of trusted entity who has to then do that. There are lots of projects out there that seek to solve this problem. I'm not making negative comments about any of them. I'm simply saying that it is much easier for me to conceptualize things that can be made aware or can be natively aware of what's going on a blockchain themselves. Most of the time when you're using a blockchain and when you're using tokens, there, in a non-currency capacity, you are actually not using a blockchain directly. You are building a system that is traditional software that then looks at a blockchain as its source of truth around certain elements. So one of my favorite use cases is the idea of, we have these keyless fobs, right, that we use to activate our cars now. There's no reason why that can't actually be an NFT, and where that's something where if you want to lend your car to somebody, then you can simply transfer the NFT to that person on a temporary basis and then have specific controls over the ability to reel that back. I think that there are lots of use cases that, sort of fall into that category. Another one that comes immediately to mind that was one of the first projects that was actually sort of envisioned in the space back in the very early days of DAOs, was the idea of using this effectively to replace kind of the key cards that you have for hotel doors, right? Where rather than getting a key card, the hotel simply transfers temporarily, on a smart contract or using an off-chain system entirely, access to this credential, which then when you present your phone to it using NFC or something like that, is able to then unlock that door. And it is basically an improvement on the existing system that sort of throws away a lot of the infrastructure that we have today and starts to put us more towards that, the more sort of online focused one before. But in the short term, I think the one I'm most excited about, and it may not be surprising, is specifically around fundraising. I think that, I came to the crypto space just having personally participated in lots of fundraising campaigns. And one of the things about those is that when you support something, you effectively get back a promise that you have a claim towards this thing that you have purchased effectively in advance. But there are lots and lots and lots of edge cases that always pop up in those crowd funds where someone needs money back for some reason or another. And by nature of the way that this happens, and there are regulatory reasons why it's this way too, I would later discover, you can't sell your interest in that project. You can't transfer it to someone else who missed the sale. And so you're just kind of stuck there. And so I saw very early on a variety of projects that I participated in that almost collapsed because somebody would want a refund and then other people would want refunds. And you could have this kind of run for the door, momentum that would kind of kill projects because the projects needed that money in order to pull it off. That's why they raised that amount. So adding in secondary markets certainly complicates things. And we're seeing this in the world of gaming today as companies on the one hand who are on the sort of game publishing side line up and say, hey, we're going to do NFTs because this represents a substantial revenue opportunity for us. And platforms on the other side are like, yeah, we're really not interested in doing that because it's going to make us money transmitters in the eyes of the law, among other problems that emerge. So, the complexity that you get there from a regulatory standpoint comes with the advantage of then being able to create true price discovery and true liquid markets, which is on the one hand very empowering for a lot of people who own stuff on the internet and is very terrifying for companies who monopolize that ownership and who benefit very much from that built-in moat that they have.
Wonderful. Salim, are you trying to say something there? Are you
Nope.
Okay. Okay.
Not
Great. Got more. Okay, so you brought up
and parse the 85 concepts that Adam just
Yeah,
giving
sorry
the
about
rest.
that.
No, this is awesome. People can watch this on replay. They can speed it up, slow it down. It's okay. It goes dense as you want. The you brought up this one's not in the questions, but you tapped on it, Adam. So I want to touch on this around regulatory management and controls law. It's crazy. And this is an interesting one where you can talk a little bit about DAOs and NFTs and all of it together, because if you ask, you could ask 10 people, where is the best place to create a legal entity for your DAO? You will get 27 answers back, right? Because no one actually knows. There is no actual answer that's really good. NFTs and are actually going through a similar situation. That point you made about accidentally becoming a money transmitter, that's serious business. And that's ruled by international law and can be quite an issue if you find yourself there. So I really appreciate you bringing that one up. One of the other questions we have from the audience, this was one of the questions we had in advance. And by the way, if you're watching and you have a question that's come up along the way, please don't be shy. Put that into the team and they will add it to the list of questions we have here, and I will be notified and I will try to get those in. We still have plenty of time for your questions. So if you're watching and you have a question or a concern or you're absolutely freaked out, just let us know, and we'll we'll talk about it. But one of the questions is, how do NFTs enable us to create longer-term client relationships for brands? Raise your hand if you want to take that one first. Okay.
I was talking to Sam Engelbart of Galaxy Digital, who's one of the top investors in this space, and he basically, his viewpoint was that your wallet of NFTs will essentially become your brand affiliations over time. And it'll completely change the advertising marketing game, because instead of having to flash and hope that you see something or get interested in something, you'll be able to gauge the interest. But what's really powerful about that is that ownership of those affiliations sits now with you, right? Which is really incredibly powerful. And you can, as Kaliya mentioned, reveal that, hey, I'm really interested in left-handed Lithuanian folk dancers or not. And you can filter now and show your own persona as part of that. One of the fascinating commentaries and observations I have specifically for Kaliya is it seems like NFTs now allow you to have a different identity per service you're affiliated with. That's all under your control. Whereas it's been the other way around. You have your eBay ID, your Google ID, your Facebook ID, and your identity is derived by that. But now it seems we can take more control of it. And Kaliya, does that get you excited?
It does, but I think you get that there with decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. I think I can't wait for the NFT crowd to show up at IIW and vice versa, because I think there's a lot of mutual learning about how this actually works in practice. As we were talking, I was like, oh, you need to figure out how DIDCOM channels get opened up from NFTs that you have, so you can have a direct, secure communication channel with your brand, right? NFTs are just like baubles in space. They don't necessarily do anything. And,
she's right.
DIDCOM has a lot of potential in terms of building a channel, a secure, owned by the company channel between themselves and their customers, as opposed to being disintermediated by the platforms that they currently communicate and connect on.
Okay. Let's drill into something you said there. I like this. NFTs are baubles in space that don't necessarily do anything. So I think that I have been seeing
How do you really feel about them, Kaliya?
Yeah, no, I gotcha. It's okay.
They're like art. Does art do anything? I mean, we can have an existential question about
does art do anything from an artist?
No,
I love that. Okay. That's great, Kaliya. Well, let me qualify this a little bit. I'm not judging it one way or the other, but I'm looking to say, okay, are there any positions that might counter that statement? So let's look at cybercons. Adam, maybe this would be for you. Cybercons do something. They, in a way, right? It's a membership club of sorts, and they emit these bananas, and then the bananas can be used for other things. So is that doing something, or is that not doing something, or is it just silly? What do you think?
I mean, I think that for as long as people have been creating, instruments that they want people to put money into, they've been trying to dress them up as not securities while actually delivering security type benefits. So I think that when you add that type of functionality into a token, then it looks a lot like a security. And so to me, that's a sign that we have a problem here. But I think that, again, it's a space that's going to sort itself out. Now, to the specific comment, I agree with Kaliya. I don't think that NFTs typically do something. I think that typically they're a transferable, marketable, monetizable, and potentially useful, but not necessarily and not generally, marker that then is made useful within other systems, but are not inherently useful themselves. And that's an important distinction, because it means that it's one part of a larger system, and it's a neutral part of a larger system. And again, the only thing that I really see that's different between doing ID with NFTs versus doing ID with the types of work that Kaliya's been talking about is just the monetizable part. And it's really just a question of whether or not it's valuable to be able to have transferable, sellable, and create marketplaces around these type of identities. I think there are good arguments on both sides of that. And right now, again, from an adoption standpoint, I'm excited about it because I think it is compelling a lot of interest in an area that otherwise is, very boring. Again, it's not that things like PGP haven't been around for a long time that are why people don't use encryption. It's that why would most people care? Right? Most people in practice don't care, and it's harder. So if it's harder and you don't care, then why would you do it? Whereas, again, in the world of NFTs, the whole thing is that it's hard, intentionally so, oddly intentionally so. And that actually just builds up more value because it means that if you make it through jumping through all these dumb hoops, then you wind up with something that actually is marketable and can represent a serious monetary gain. And there are lots of people out there who I know who make more money playing dumb games, like literally Pac-Man style games in the world of NFTs than they do working at a professional job that they've trained for and worked in for 30 years. So I mean, like that type of magnet to these new ideas or to these new implementations of old ideas, I think is incredibly valuable. And that's, again, where they don't do anything, but that one little feature set, I think, fundamentally changes the game when it comes to adoption. And that's why I'm so interested.
Very interesting. Kaliya, you wanna come in on that?
No, I mean, I agree. I think it's funny that we have these different perspectives
awesome.
where we like,
I just want to throw something in. There's a key piece of NFTs that makes it really highly useful rather than just a JPEG with an identifier on it, which is the fact that you can program them, right? So you can in these games, they're taking two CyberKongs and you can make baby Kongs, only if you have this type of a CyberKong, and they can have different characteristics that yield different utility depending on the characteristics you have. So you essentially have this programmable thing that can then have multiple outputs and have a whole flow of future to it that is totally distinct from traditional art. Right? Traditional art, you look at it, you experience it in whatever way. But this is now an art piece that mints other art pieces under the right conditions, has babies under the right conditions, mints a utility token, changes as you change depending on how you want to dress it up. If you have the right things with the right widgets, etc., can go into the metaverse and do certain things with it. So this is, I think, it's like the cryptocurrencies aren't interesting because they're digital. They're interesting because they're programmable, and we can program money that becomes supremely interesting. Just like we can now program these NFTs to do various other. I think that's the real power. I think we're just starting the experience of what could we do with these things.
There's another flip to that, Salim, just to add on. Not only are they programmable, remember there's the data and the metadata. The metadata is equally important. And in fact, when you hear all of these stories about NFTs disappearing, impermanence, and using things like IPFS or Arweave, don't forget that the NFT itself cannot just be programmable, which it is, it can program. And that's what you mean when you say two CyberKongs making a new baby Kong. You're combining the genetic material or the metadata of these two NFTs, and it's actually running. It's being plugged into a piece of code that then knows, like DNA or something, that knows how to do something with that. So these NFTs with their associated metadata are also programmers. And that's pretty crazy. And they're highly portable as well. If someone's to accept or make their code compatible with that metadata, then it can enter their context as well. And I know that's a little bit trippy in a way, but it is absolutely true. And this is kind of a big promise of blockchains and cryptocurrency is, we call it programmable money. Sometimes people call that Bitcoin programmable money, but look what just happened. Did the whole world just become a computer?
So just to say, so I agree with that perspective. My answer was more to what is the current state, and like I said, as I said earlier, like I just view where we are today as still the play stupid games, win stupid prizes part of the curve. And you know, again, like I think that these are all great experiments, and I think the part that I like the most is that it's not a centralized effort. There's no standards body that has to come to an agreement about a thing. It's just 1,000 or 10,000 different experiments that are all out there. And as we've seen from this space in the past, you know, whatever is perceived to have worked will then become the best practice for 10,000 projects that will then ape it, so to speak. And you know, and that will kind of pull us in that direction. So yeah, I mean, I would say the potential for these projects to be really meaningful and to actually have, I don't know if I would necessarily call it built-in utility, but some form of value that goes beyond the identifier and the image, and you know, the ability to control certain things potentially as well. Like that definitely is where NFTs are going, but it's not where they are today.
Very well said. I'm going to shift us to another question that just came in live. So Anne in our audience makes the following statement and asks the following question. MedTech seems like a big area for self-sovereign identity. Is there any risk or downside for the individual user?
I'll answer that briefly, and then I suspect that Kaliya will have a more nuanced answer than mine. So the one of the learnings that I have from cryptocurrency is that much of the value is premised on this idea of being your own bank, which means that you no longer have to rely on third parties and you can custody yourself while still having access to it in an internet-capable world. That is incredibly empowering. But it also comes with costs, and those costs are you are responsible. And being responsible for your security in the same way that a bank is responsible for the security of your money is a terrifying thing a lot of times, and not something to be taken lightly, and not something that is without cost. So that is also true whenever you're talking about decentralizing or disintermediating any of these different platforms, is that to the extent that you can do a good job of maintaining your credentials, you are probably better than whoever else would be maintaining your credentials, and it's entirely in your control. But to the extent that you're not okay with that, then it's your fault. And there's really very few people to blame, or more importantly, very few people who can help you in that circumstance.
Yeah, that concept of agency. Kaliya?
Yeah, so I'll point the viewer or listener at two projects. One, in terms of people collecting at least their own health information. There's an open source project called Health Information Exchange of One, HIE of One, led by a doctor, a computer scientist who has worked in my community for a really long time, really trying to put the patient as the pivot point for record exchange in these systems. And then HPEC, which is built by a physician to support physician credentialing, being in the hands of the physicians themselves. Leah Houston, who founded it as an emergency room physician and actually had her identity stolen by a hospital. So it's a big issue, is that doctor credentials are kind of the key to billing in the universe of healthcare, and they are valuable and are not always under the control of the physicians themselves. So she really wants to make a dent at that challenge using self-sovereign identity technology.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought about a hospital actually doing that willfully, impersonating a doctor for some reason, but it makes sense actually that could happen pretty easily. Hadn't thought about that at all, Kaliya. Really, really interesting. All right. Drawing another line here. Salim, get one of those 100 questions ready. You'll have a moment coming up soon. This is in a different direction. Are there any real estate title NFTs at the moment? Really? All right. I think it's Trissa says.
So it really depends on what you consider real estate. If we're talking about real estate insofar as like metaverse platforms are concerned, or virtual worlds, then yes, there are many, many, many different types and many numerically different NFTs that are effectively deeds to various plots or estates or parcels. That's been true for about 5 years at this point, somewhere around that line. Decentralized was the first one of these projects to come out, but there have been many that have come since, and some of which are indeed picking up traction. I would also consider this an incredibly nascent space, right? I'm thinking about this as being really interesting. Like, as you said, we threw an event the other day But I'm thinking this is not going to be really interesting for most people for another 3 or 5 years. On the kind of physical real estate side, there have been lots of projects that have attempted this, and I think Kaliya started getting at kind of an important point to take away from this in one of her earlier answers, which is that the kind of intersection between law on the one side and digital on the other side is messy and requires architectures to be built that are intelligent about both things. And so far, those efforts have, in my opinion, not hit the mark. We have people who are very smart on the technology side who know nothing about law, and we've got the opposite situation too. So there may be some projects out there. I think I recall some projects that that did do maybe not non-fungible token fundraisers, but fungible token fundraisers maybe a couple of years ago. I feel like Charlie Shrem was involved with one of those projects, and I consulted on with a hotel owner who wanted to tokenize his thing, and I don't know if he ever went forward with it. That would have been back in 2017 or 2018. So like I said, I know that there have been a number of attempts. I am unclear whether or not anyone has actually hit the mark and come to market with one of those things in a non-test capacity, though.
Yeah, I also don't know of a broadly applied framework. A lot of people are taking chances and risks and spending millions and millions of dollars to try to create legal and arbitration frameworks that support the tying of physical plots to digital credentialing. And I believe I heard a story, and I can't remember that. If I get the name wrong, I swear I think it was Benioff or someone at that level had purchased a piece of land recently. I don't know why I think that. I have to see if I can find that story. Salim, Kaliya, have you heard of any other projects specifically for real world land title? I mean, just before you answer, we know that. In The Mystery of Capital, Hernando de Soto pointed out that this would be the key to unlocking a tremendous amount of wealth, in his own words at that time. But I still don't think we've really seen that happen.
I mean, there's land registry digitization projects, but that's different.
Right. Yep. Agreed. Salim, have you heard of anything else lately?
There's a real estate token called Propy. PROPY, where they're trying to create real estate NFTs. And I think they've done one full real estate transaction between buyer and seller using just the blockchain without touching the real world. And that's very new. The jurisdictional issues and the legal issues here are ridiculous, right? Because every country has its own real estate laws, broker fees, land registry titles, et cetera, et cetera. My favorite story about the Honduras project, where they tried to put land titles on the blockchain, was the immune system response, because the government, you got to like 8 out of 10 steps to get it done, and then the government realized, wait a minute, if this happens, we're not authoritative of who owns what land that the blockchain is, and therefore you can't do corruption. And that killed the project instantly.
Right.
Stopped the whole thing, because how could you extract bribes, etc., if you're not authoritative? And I think that's the work now to do, is to do this. What I suspect we'll see happening is what we're starting to see in the NFT world, where groups of people will just self-associate with things and start right around the existing systems. And they'll just go, yeah, we all agree amongst us that you own that land, and that what the government says. Yeah. I think that's the kind of thing we're going to start to see in various places, Russia and other places where there's not proper governance occurring from the top down.
Yeah,
it's going to be messy as hell, though.
It's going to be. Yeah, they're going to make DAOs, and eventually those DAOs will be there. We do have one community member I know of. It's a very early stage for his project, so I don't know that if I should or shouldn't mention it or not. But he's trying to tackle some of this in India. It's Pratik's project. Salim, he's doing some interesting work out there. So all right, well, that's an interesting one where we can segue over to talk a little bit about distributed autonomous organizations.
I have a question.
You have a question first. Go for it, Salim.
Yeah. For Adam. When you're kind of one of the most cutting edge folks looking at different projects of NFTs, what are some of the most interesting 2 or 3 things that you're seeing out there? Because few people have that breadth of view across all the spectrum of projects as you do.
I appreciate that endorsement. Honestly, like I said, I view most of the spaces in the play stupid games, win stupid prizes phase, and so I honestly don't pay much attention except for the things that really seem like they're getting traction, because traction is really kind of the question about this stuff. So again, like I actually don't want to name any specific projects if you don't mind. But generally, like I said, I think that the projects that are doing things that are different than the projects that are out there today. So they're, again, like we mentioned CryptoPunks early on. CryptoPunks was not a success when it came out. CryptoPunks was something literally nobody cared about, nobody paid any money for, and it only became a success in hindsight because people were like, oh, NFTs are a thing. I wonder what the first project was. Oh, these are really cheap. I'm going to buy, these, right? And then it's kind of like the Bitcoin question or the Ethereum question. There are many people who will see a model that works, whether in hindsight or currently, and they will say that's the thing that I'm going to do. And then you have, here's the original thing over here, and there's only one of those, and here's the 10,000 projects over here that there's many of, and you get this effect where some number of people are going to go to the original one, and some number of people are going to go to sort of the diaspora of everything that's come after. And it usually winds up, at least in the world of crypto network effects, ensconcing the original project as the obvious choice to enough people that it becomes the dominant player in the space. And then that is very frequently sort of seen as the best practice for how to pull off that thing. And then everybody follows the best practice. Although it is not a best practice, it is a first successful practice, which is a very different thing. I'm anything that's like so right now kind of the trend is CryptoPunks into Bored Ape Yacht Club into 10,000 different projects that are all doing effectively the same thing. I would avoid and ignore all of those. Some of them will make money, most of them will lose money, but I don't care about any of them because they're not doing anything interesting. So I'm always looking for what's the next thing that's doing something interesting.
But that's my question. What are the things you're seeing that you think are the most interesting or that you expect to see in the future?
I expect to see more complex systems being built that use NFTs to represent ownership within them and to grant access within them. I think I'm working on some of the most interesting stuff with NFTs, but like I said, I would rather not name names than have to toot my own horn.
All right. Kaliya, I'll throw that. You can come in on this one. I just want to make one point about the CryptoPunks, Adam, to get your thought on this. And Kaliya, this would be a really interesting one for you too. I've noticed lately that many CryptoPunks have Twitter accounts, and many of those Twitter accounts, especially for certain punks, have a lot of followers, and they're garnering a reasonable voice. But we have no idea who that is behind the punk. And what about that? What does that mean?
Conspicuous consumption. I mean, like that's what we're seeing, again, like you look back at prior instances of like intense inflation and mania markets, and conspicuous consumption is the thing that you do to signal that you are doing great, right? And then everybody wants to follow those examples because they also want to signal that, because to the extent, again, like when you're raising money, to the extent that you don't need money from somebody is to the extent that they want to give it to you, right? And it's the same is true in reverse. And so there's an implicit assumption in our society that the number next to your net worth is directly proportional to how smart you are or how good at things you are. And I disagree with that fundamentally, but I still think that it's incredibly influential as far as thinking. And I think that when you see people representing themselves as investors in these early NFTs, basically what you're seeing is they're signaling one of two things, and oftentimes you can't tell which it is. One is that I'm so smart because I got here early and now I'm rich. The other is I'm so rich that I didn't need to be smart. Here I am now, and and this makes me smart for buying it at this point, right?
Love it, love it.
That is epic.
That was great, Adam. Kaliya, do you want to add anything to that before I take us into a whole other line of questions?
I agree.
Okay,
that was a great comment. Take us into the next thing.
Gonna go back and replay that one at some point as a clip. That was great. Great question. Definitely from the OpenEXO community. Don't have a name with this one. When do you see movement toward purpose-driven NFTs as opposed to doing the stupid things and winning stupid prizes that we see now?
So sooner than you'd think, but I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it right now.
So, well, timeline is okay. It doesn't have to be specific projects. So are we at a point, Adam, where we know enough about how these things work, where we have business models that can be applied in broader spectrum for better reasons?
I think that I think a lot of this winds up tying in with DAOs. I think that DAOs are going to become increasingly important ways by which we organize distributed groups of humans across geographically diverse areas to solve problems that we can't solve as individuals and that exist outside of the sort of structure of, well, it's the government's job to solve these problems, right? Where we all pay taxes and then the government solves our problems in theory. In practice, I think that we pay taxes and most of the time the government doesn't solve our problems, but we still pay taxes, right? And so my general sense is that, you know, we'll continue to pay taxes and we'll also pay to solve our own problems using structures that are more conducive to actually delivering the types of results that we want. And it's worth emphasizing that point, delivering the types of results that we want. The delivery of results is the critical sort of moment for an NFT. Because effectively, sorry, not an NFT, for a DAO. Because a DAO is effectively a big giant pot of money that lives on the internet that has sort of this decentralized and distributed characteristic about it of people who are vested in it by nature of having put in money, who can then determine for themselves in a much more on the ground, fringes of the network way, whether the problem has actually been solved. And to the extent that it has been solved, that money can be then deployed as a reward for having solved that problem, as opposed to what we typically do, which is we pay for process. And the process of getting money to then conduct process, which you say and have convinced people will probably solve the problem, is a very different set of incentives and set of skills than actually solving most problems that you're attempting to do. And my belief is that DAOs specifically and NFTs as part of that will play a role in sort of popularizing this method of solving problems, and also will, in all likelihood, introduce both signaling benefits, conspicuous consumption, as we were talking about before. It doesn't necessarily just have to be about money. It can also be about influence. It can also be about signaling for a whole variety of things. And then on the other side, again, distributing sort of the decision-making power such that money only gets paid out when the problem has actually been solved in the way that it was defined, rather than through any other means, which can be many, but typically don't result in the desired outcome.
Have we seen proof of solution staking yet? I don't know. That would be interesting. So quick little commercial break. This is a series of town halls that we've had, and there are a number of other panels and things. I'd like everybody who's interested in these topics to note. I have 2 links to share. Hopefully the team can pop these up on the screen. A previous talk was with Peter Diamandis, Eric Pouillet, and Salim Ismail, as recorded on YouTube. And definitely you should go back and have a look at that one. I took couple of pages of notes from that one as well. It was a really fantastic talk. The previous town hall, number 10, that we had was with Michael Janssen, Salim Ismail, and myself. And that was also a really fun talk. Got tons and tons of good views. And I would highly encourage anybody that would like to go back and look at that. So if I see them in there, they're going to pop these links up on the screen. Just note those, bookmark them for later. It's a great time to spend with your friends and family and a bucket of popcorn. So we'll come back around now. And I really do want to dig a little deeper into this concept of DAOs as we start to wind into the last parts of this. And again, I invite any of you to ask a question of your own. So just stop me. It's okay. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question. That'd be very DAO-like in a sense, wouldn't it? So we'll do that. So when it comes to DAOs, first let's start with a definition. And maybe we all have a definition of DAOs. I think I've seen that a lot. You kind of just gave viewers Adam, so I'll come back around to you if you want to modify that. But Kaliya and then Salim, do you have definitions for what you think a DAO is?
Go, Salim.
It's a co-op on the blockchain
Yeah.
with a fully decentralized environment, and that means people can self-provision onto it really easily, which is, I think, the really powerful part.
Yeah, I go for yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, yes, and sometimes I wonder if people really understand what they're getting into. I happen to, as my bio said, moonlight as an instructor at a college. These are pre-capitalist institutions that work with distributed governance. They're very slow, and they are problematic from a like get things done decision making point of view sometimes. So I think, you know, we can define them however we want. I think they come with the need to upgrade our capacity to govern ourselves and to be co-intelligent, to point at Tom Atlee's work. And to, you know, one of my other talents is designing and facilitating interactive events that really accelerate how we collaborate together. We can have DAOs. We need to also have an investment in the social technologies that could actually make them work at scale, because we don't have those running right now.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. The actual operating systems, if you like, for DAOs are completely experimental. The best examples we have are historical from cooperatives. So when people ask me what a DAO is, I try to say it's a decentralized, crypto monetized, digitalized, not just digitized, but digitalized, meaning the processes as well, cooperative. I know that's a mouthful, but that's the best way I've been able to explain it. And learn your history. Cooperatives have been thriving for hundreds of years in up economies and down economies, and I think we need to pay attention to that. I would reference people to a book called Platform Cooperative or Everything to Everyone. Those are two really good books. Trevor Holtz and Nathan Schneider, I think. So,
well, there's an important point here, which is as we're moving to, you know, we've been running the world on a top-down architecture for the last few hundred years, right? Corporations and Judeo-Christian religions and the military-industrial complex, very pyramid or structured command and control structures. And we're seeing the rise of new bottom-up structures that are much more decentralized and participatory and nurturing and peer-to-peer. You've got Burning Man and the maker movement, the DIY movement, the open source movement, and I think DAOs are the epitome of that. And we'll see now, I think, a kind of a rush to create these things for all sorts of models where traditional top-down structures don't work, including government. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see groups of people get together, form a DAO, go form, do some sort of civics participation where government previously should have done it or could have done it, but now it's too top down to do anything. And I think we're going to see a huge shift towards that structure, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Climate change. You know, government is not able to deal with climate change.
So again, like if you look back at the history of, you know, the Western world, you find that there was a lot of decentralization in the founding of the US, and there was a lot of decentralization in many of sort of the parts. And to the extent that it was possible to create that decentralization several hundred years ago, right before the advent of electricity, telecommunications, a laundry list of other enabling technologies, they did a pretty good job. But we've had so much optimization since that time that the decentralized characteristics are much less pronounced today than they were at that point. And if you were to build a similar system today, you would build it in a much different way. So people, again, have this idea when we talk about DAOs, they're really what we're talking about as individuals. But a DAO is really just a structure. It is a husk into which you pour the things that are important and the processes that are important. And we live in a time where sort of the bureaucratic load in government and in big business too, but government has been more insulated from sort of competition. And it's made it easier for it to happen there, has really never been higher than it is today. And that bureaucracy, that is process, right? That is all of the thing that if a guy wanted to, you could use a DAO to in large part take what is a very centralized, top-heavy bureaucratic process and instead codify it into software such that you do not have to have defined participants, but rather participants can emerge that can perform the functions that we're talking about. And again, I'm speaking in very abstract terms here, but to pull it back to a somewhat out there, let's say that, example, we've been talking about this as a co-op. One thing that I like to think about a lot is the federal government in the United States is effectively a cooperative of all of the states, where the states hold sovereignty and then they delegate that sovereignty under certain conditions in certain areas to the federal government. And if we were to create a system today, I think a DAO would be a very attractive measure because it would eliminate a lot of sort of the conflicts of interest that arise from having a permanent bureaucratic class who very much benefit from the way that things are and are therefore resistant to changes, even if those changes are better in aggregate terms or improve process in a variety of ways. So again, we're very, very early in the kind of age of DAOs, and we don't know what they will do, but we do know that they can do whatever we ask them to do, and then whatever we follow through on. And so that's what I'm interested to see what happens with.
That's very well said. So we're coming into the last couple of minutes here, and I'm going to try something. I'll try to get some quick hit questions in that have been sitting out there. So I need quick answers back, and we'll see how we go. Okay. So if you want to answer, just kind of rattle it off there when I call on you. So what are the best example? What is a best example of an emerging DAO that we might want to model that you know of today? Adam.
I honestly am not going to give you any examples again because I don't think we have anything.
Don't think you have any?
Off of.
Yeah.
I think we should just figure out what's the proper set of rules as best we can figure it out for the use case, and then build that, and then try it and see if that's the right way to do it.
Perfect. Salim or Kaliya?
I'm in the token engineering commons because a friend of mine was like, "Come join a DAO." I was like, "Okay, if you say they're good, I'll join the party." So I tried. Like I'm experimenting at least a little bit. That's all I'll say.
Perfect. All right.
Oh,
okay.
Kimball Musk just launched this thing called the Big Green DAO. Who's Elon's brother, who's done a lot of decentralized bottom-up gardening and food growing. And I think that has some interesting steps in it. But again, we have a long way to go. This is like a Cambrian explosion of like weird forms that are going to now emerge over the next kind of few months and years. And we'll see what pans out and what works. It's going to be kind of nuts and fascinating.
I don't think they would call themselves a DAO, but I think the Bitcoin community is a bit of a DAO, and I think we have a lot to learn from seeing how they've matured because it's one of the oldest. So I'd throw that in there. Next question is the okay? Wow, interesting. This one just came in. Is the internet a kind of DAO? I don't know.
I would call the internet. Go ahead.
I was going to say two talks come to mind. Clay Shirky gave this talk about love on the internet at Supernova. It's on, look it up on YouTube. And Jonathan Zittrain also gave a speech where he's like, love is underlying connection and caring between the people who run the infrastructure is what keeps the internet going. So maybe yes.
Interesting. All right. This one's fun, and I have to get this one in here. So sorry to cut that last one off quick, but 'tis the season is the assertion. And how could a parent or a grandmother give a teen something useful to enter into this world, into the metaverse? Is it an NFT? Is it a headset? Is it some kind of glass? Is it a gaming rig? What's the perfect holiday gift for those interested in NFTs, DAOs, and identity?
That's a hard one, I think.
Yeah.
There is no easy path in, and the part of kind of crypto markets where they are right now. I mean, I think the thing that you want is you want a person to have the capability to experiment and access with the things that they want, that they find to be compelling in the space, because it really is still that part. And, some of kind of the some of the people who I think are most important in the space, started learning about this stuff, started being exposed to it when they were in their, early teens, late teens. And it's those types of people who are thinking about this in a way that's more native than I can at this point. And, I'm only 36. So I think that there's an advantage to enabling your children or the people who you're wanting to enable to access it. And I think that on the one side, there's definitely a technology precursor. I don't think it's VR. I think that VR goggles and all that stuff, again, I have tons of stuff, and that's not important right now. That might be important in 3 or 5 years, but I bet you that the technology is going to be a lot cheaper and a lot better at that point, so I wouldn't spend the money on it anyways. Computer is probably a good one. I think maybe just a small amount of money that they can then choose what they want to do within the space and experiment, and because they have skin in the game, then they care about it more and they can learn more.
Yeah, I'd say a MetaMask wallet with a little bit of ETH, and just let them play.
Yeah,
ETH, maybe not ETH, maybe something else, but yeah.
Whatever.
And Kaliya, anything you want to throw in there?
I think those are great suggestions.
Yeah, I know what I did have already done is it's knowledge, right? So I would let my children watch this this episode. I would let them watch the prior episodes. I have showed them how Axie Infinity is like Pokemon Go, but it's driven by NFTs. So really just knowledge. I know that sounds ridiculous and they may not appreciate it yet, but but if you don't know, you can't go. So I think that's where I'll wrap. So I have to hand this back over to our organizer, Nikki, and marketing chief for the EXO Economy, so she can wrap us up. Before I do that, Adam, thank you so much. Kaliya, Salim, really, really deep gratitude for your time and your willingness to share what you know with our audience out there today. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome discussion.
Thank
Good
you.
to see
Really
you, Kaliya
great.
and Adam.
Yeah. So Nikki, it's back over to you to wind us down.
I appreciate everything that went down today. It's like another mind-blowing episode, and we will have to cut that up into little pieces so some of us can absorb it. But I just wanted to remind everybody that we've got a team working behind the scenes that are just awesome, and they just make everything in this village work. It takes a village, right? So I want to thank Angel and Angela and Angelo, my EXO angels, and Eric and Pratik and Rodrigo and Vanessa and Ying and Jerry and Jill, who's running the Jerry and Jill, that's cute, running the show behind the scenes here. So I so much appreciate all of you, speakers, everybody, and be exponential and take it to the next level. Town Hall number 12 coming up.